Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I'm back in town as you can see. For a number of years, I felt a deep resentment towards my parents. And I don't know if some of you who grew up with emotionally distant parents, if you feel the same way. But for me, I always thought, they had the weirdest parenting methods. I always questioned them. Their tendency to uh, overcorrect me, either through repetitive beatings, shaming, or just flying off the handle over the littlest things. And I often felt like my family, to tell you the truth, was often like the weirdo family in the neighborhood. And I often asked myself as a child, why couldn't my family be normal like the other families? And it certainly didn't build my self-confidence growing up. I remember not wanting to bring girls from school or friends around the house because I was just so self-conscious of my parents having one of their classic meltdowns where they would just scream at me at the top of their lungs in front of my friends, and my friends would watch in horror. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, here we go again, the weirdo family again in the neighborhood, screaming and making a scene in public. And yes, my parents were emotionally distant, emotionally unavailable while I was growing up. And I think a lot of, Gen Xers had parents that were the same way. And in today's video, I want to talk about how emotionally distant parents got to be this way and how understanding them uh, helped me see my parents in a different way. And this came later on in life, but better late than never. And I'm sure many of you who grew up in the 80s as a Gen X can relate to having parents like mine. As I grew up, I, started to become emotionally distant myself. At first, I didn't realize like where this was all coming from, because I was just so pent up in my own anger towards them and towards feeling that my childhood was robbed from me. So I was quite bitter about that as a young adult, and I spent a large portion of my adult life just trying to find myself, trying to, find my purpose in life, because I spent it wondering, why I was here. I often, I can't say I was very happy all the time because I had this emotional burden on my shoulders. And, the surprising thing was, at one point, I had such disdain for my parents that I actually thought of disowning them because I thought not having them around and to be able to start a new, fresh life without them in my life was probably the best thing. And it never came to that, but a surprising thing came about that I never expected. As I got older, I started to ask questions about, why did they treat myself and my siblings the way they did? So I started to delve into things about, I don't know why I thought about it, but I started to wonder how my grandparents treated them when they were growing up, and how did my great-grandparents treat my grandparents and my ancestors before them. I thought this because I always thought growing up that was always a burden, because my parents always complained about us. They complained a lot about me. I don't know whether it was to control me. Probably was, now knowing what I know. But I couldn't bring myself ever to understand why a parent would beat a child mercilessly or put them through endless emotional abuse, because when I see the kids that I teach at my martial arts school, I can never think of even laying a hand on them or even putting them through that kind of stuff. But I guess once I start to look into my parents' upbringing, and this happened more so in my 50s, it made a lot more sense. And the reason why that came about, that thought it came about and didn't come up about earlier, was my grandparents had just passed away in my 50s. And I started to find out a little bit more about my grandparents and start to find out that actually my grandparents treated my father and mother basically the same way, right? They were emotionally distant themselves, and there was a lot of shaming and physical abuse. So it started to finally make sense. Now, I'm not saying, I forgive them for all the punishment I took, but I start to see my parents in a different way, as very flawed human beings. At the time, to be fair, there weren't parenting courses on how to become a good parent. There weren't self-help books to help them heal themselves that we're all privy to today, through the internet, through lots of books and stuff like that. So once I understood this, I began to feel like the years of pain that I held in my heart and on my shoulders started to lift from me. And it was probably one of the best feelings I had in a long time, because I never knew what it was like to feel so free and to be able to have so much mental capacity to think of new things, right? To be more creative instead of rehashing, all the bad things that have happened in the past. And I also felt, one of the biggest things I felt was I never felt responsible for their emotions or their happiness anymore. Whereas before, I would feel guilted into doing things for them just to make them happy. And meanwhile, I was miserable the entire time. And I started to realize that my happiness was determined by me and only me. And I learned my parents grew up in a period where, children's rights weren't protected. Physical punishment, shaming, and emotional abuse were a common way to discipline kids. So therefore, as neglected kids, it's understandable that they would become adults, preoccupied with having their immediate needs met. And their lack of childhood connection actually makes them demand loyalty and sacrifice from their kids as a way of feeling, I guess, secure by learning how to control others. So it explains a lot of things how my parents treated me. I mean, it explains a big reason why they didn't want me to leave home, even though I was already 23 years old, is because moving away thousands of miles away, they wouldn't have control over me anymore. And they felt like, I guess, they would lose that control. So I started, looking into what my grandparents, or my great-grandparents, I started looking into what my great-grandparents were like. And I often heard from, my uncles or aunts telling me that my great-grandparents were extremely, extremely mean people. They didn't tell me much more. I could just tell by the stories they told me that they did not like them at all. So that was enough for me to hear. And this made me think that this behavior was passed on for generations, going way back until someone like myself or some of my siblings break this cycle. Lastly, my parents never got to develop their sense of self. So they never got to observe how their behavior affected us kids when we're growing up, and how that led into a lot of decisions and behaviors that we exhibit now as adults. So when my parents never got to develop their sense of self, they resort to blaming their kids for their problems, and they expected us to change first. So it was interesting because recently I just got back from visiting my parents. I was in town for a wedding over there, and I just realized that for the last 6 visits that I actually enjoyed being around them, and there was no argument, and they respected me. They respected my wishes, and it was refreshing, to tell you the truth. And it kind of made me, wish that we've always had this understanding. And I think it's one of the most tragic things for a lot of us kids who grew up in that time period. And I feel sorry for a lot of commenters who've made comments in my previous videos that they don't have a relationship with their parents and they're still estranged. And part of me feels at peace that we finally can sit in a room and talk without tension or bad feelings when I leave the house. But at the same time, I feel kind of sad that it's taken this long. And I think these are lessons that we can all learn. So for some of us that have kids and stuff like that, or that we can learn to do a better job for the next generation, because so much time has passed, and so much time, in my opinion, has been wasted. And fortunately for my life, it's turned out fairly good, right? But if I can get back, go back in time and get back all those decades, the lost years, would have been even better. But it is what it is, and we all have to move forward. And I'm glad I did, and I hope many of you who are listening to this today, hope that you can experience the same thing I did as well, and have boundaries and everything established with your parents. And I don't know how many more years I'm going to have with my parents. Probably not a lot, but you know what? It's. I think it's a good feeling to have, to go to your to move on the rest of your life without having such a heavy heart. So I'm interested in hearing from all of you. Now that you're older, have you looked into why your emotionally distant parent treated you the way they did? And has your relationship with them improved, or are they still trying to make their issues your issues? Feel free to comment below. I try to read every comment, and it's really builds the community here. I love when people start to engage with one another in the comment section. And if you like the content on this channel and you like this video, feel free to like, share, or subscribe. And feel free to check out my next video. I'll talk to you next time. Take care.